Welcome to a new module. Throughout this course, we learned a lot about Angular 2, but one thing we haven't covered is testing unit tests, to be precise. Well, the reason for this is that I really wanted to focus on the Angular 2 code and not confuse people with mixing in some non-Angular 2 testing code. That being said, testing is something which a lot of people might want to do in their project, which actually improves your project, and hence I will give you an introduction in this module. And that is important, an introduction. You will learn how you can write your tests with the Angular CLI. You will also find resources for non-CLI projects. You will learn how a test generally works and why you might want to test, and which testing utilities Angular 2 offers you. I will give you, or I will explain some example tests. For example, we will test a basic component, a service, and a pipe. But thereafter, it's really up to you to use the resources I also provide to dive deeper into it. Because testing alone would be enough content for, let's say, a 15-hour course, and it's not what this course is about, and it's not what this course should be about. But with that, let's dive in. Why might you want to create unit tests? Let's have a look at this application. We got a user component, we got a user detail component, a reverse pipe, and a user service. Well, the user component also uses some input binding here or some property binding with the user detail component. We can ask a couple of questions, or one and the same question actually. Does the component work as intended, the pipe, and the service? This is what we want to answer with unit tests. We also might want to answer, does the input work as intended, or does the injection here work as intended? These are questions we want to cover with unit tests. And with unit tests, we hopefully get a true response for all our tests telling us that our application is working as intended. Of course, you can already imagine that writing the tests correctly is an important part in order to get the right answers. And that's something I'm not going to teach you here because I can't. Writing correct tests is, again, something for its own course. Not even an Angular 2 specific course, a course focusing on testing. It's not the goal of what I want to do here. I want to show you how to use testing in an Angular 2 application, not philosophize about how testing should work or how tests should be written. So with the answers to our questions, the cool thing is unit tests allow us to guard against breaking changes, because we could say upon upgrading our Angular 2 application, we rerun all our tests and we see which tests now fail. If we know they worked before, we know which places in our application now are broken due to the update. We can also analyze our code behavior to detect both expected and unexpected results. And we can reveal design mistakes. Maybe when writing our test, we experience some problem writing it because we find a mistake in our general design, or we find it whilst running the test due to an unexpected response. So this is where tests can help us. Again, the philosophy behind testing and how to write correct tests is something which will not be covered here, which can't be covered here, but I want to show you how to create tests in your Angular 2 application. For that, I created a brand new project with the CLI. Again, at the end of this module, you'll find a lecture where I also link to the official docs actually, which really have a great article on testing. And not only does this article dive really deep into it and explores some use cases or a lot of use cases I don't cover here, it also will give you a setup instruction how to set up the, testing environment, for example, with System.js. Well, back to the CLI case though. We do have this app component, and by default we do have the app component spec file, which is not empty, which has this code instead. This is a unit test, or actually there are a couple of tests. Each block beginning with it here is a test. And the before each at the beginning, well, as you might guess, executes some code which should be run before running each test. Now we're seeing a lot of code here which we haven't seen before. We're using a couple of Angular 2 specific test utilities here to make our tests work. But before diving into them, let's understand how should a test theoretically work if we think about it logically. We do have our Angular 2 application with the app module and the app component, and it runs in the browser. Somehow we need to run the same in the testing environment, and the testing environment in the end is just a script running over it, we could say. So in order to simulate the same behavior, we also need to bootstrap our application, we need to set up the app module, and then we need to execute certain tasks the user might do or see. And that is what's happening here, and I think it's a great start to simply analyze this file to understand how Angular 2 unit tests work. So at the top, we import two things from @Angular core testing. That's the testing package Angular 2 ships with, which has a couple of utility tools, for example, testbed and async. I'll explain both of them in a second. Then we describe our to-be-tested unit in this case, which is our app. Here we want to test the app component and module, of course. We then have a closure, this function executed here. This is a part of the describe function here, and that will all be executed by the test runner we're using. Now we'll use the CLI with a command I'll show you in a second to run these tests, but you could set up any testing environment. A typical test runner is Karma, simply a package you install. It is installed here, which runs our tests. This script I was referring to. Well, then we first execute before each, so we do something before each of these blocks here is executed. Because important, even though these blocks here follow, well, after each other, each block is executed totally independent of the block before it. So this block is not influenced by the code in this block, and this block doesn't care about the first two blocks. Therefore, before each is the only thing which will be executed before each individual block. And here we configure a testing module as this method on the testbed, and testbed is basically the main Angular 2 testing utility object. So this allows us to configure the module for our testing. And what we do here is simply declare which components we want to have in this testing environment, which is our app component. So this clearly looks like the app module with the declarations, but it doesn't have the imports, providers, or the bootstrap. And that makes sense because here we want to focus on a part of the application. We're not really running it in the browser. We only want to focus on the app component, and the rest will be simulated by our testing environment. So this is declared and initialized therefore, and then we got a couple of tests. The first one checks if the app was properly created. We always need to create the component in each it block, since each block is contained in itself. We do this by using create component on the test bed, and then we store this new component in this fixture variable. That's just a name you'll commonly see, fixture, for this created component, this testing unit we're looking at. Well, we're creating a component, and of course we pass as an argument which component we want to create, the app component here, of course. Well, then we can get our app by using this fixture, which holds our created component. The debug element, that's just a property we can access to get access to a couple of, well, elements we can now have a look at. For example, the instance of the component which was created, which is our application in the end. And then we always end our it block here by using the expect method. Now that's not coming from Angular 2, as is before each and it, by the way. These are all testing package, so Karma related, or Jasmine to be precise, which is the testing package related methods. So expect basically says we expect whatever we pass here, so our app, we expect our app to be truthy, which means yet to kind of exist. And this is how we can read it. We have it, then this string is purely up to your choice, so it should create the app as basically human readable. And then we tell what do we expect when we should create the app. Well, we expect the app to be truthy, to be somehow existent. In the next block, we check if, or we say, it should have a title which says app works. Because that's the default setup, right? We got the app works property, which we output here with string interpolation. So it should have this title, and we check it here again. We create the component, we get access to the instance, and then we say, well, we expect this app to have a title property, so this property here, which equals app works, this string. And of course is only true as long as we don't change or remove this title. So that is how you write your tests. You have to reflect your actual application. Well, and finally, the third already existing test here is that it should render an H1 tag. We create it again. Now we call detect changes to trigger change detection. That's the only way to do it. It won't run automatically since it doesn't run in the browser. So we detect or we trigger change detection manually so that the template gets rendered. Here the native element, which gives us access to our template. And then we basically say, well, on this compiled template, we expect the H1 element, we get it with a normal JavaScript query selector, since this is a normal JavaScript object decompiled variable here. We expect the H1 element to have a text content which contains AppWorks. These are the three already existing apps, and this is the logic how this file gets executed, how it uses the Angular 2 testing utilities with testbed and async. I will come back to this in a second. And the default testing environment methods like it and expect to, well, basically describe what we would like to see and how it should work. Now, this is the theory. In the next videos, I want to dive deeper into this, show some examples for testing a pipe, testing another component which also has a service injected into it, and what this async thing here actually does, as well as which other utilities the Angular 2 testing package offers us. Well, now that we understood how these tests are generally written, let's see them in action. In the terminal, run ng-test inside this project folder to run our tests through the CLI, which again already has this test runner and so on built in. Now, what this will do is it will start up the testing environment. We can ignore these warnings. It starts up Karma, and here we see that it executed 3 of 3 tests successfully because we have 3 tests here. Now let's change something to see a test fail. If we go to the app component and change AppWorks to AppWorks without the second P, so just with one P, then the test where we check that it contains AppWorks, as well as this test here, should fail. So if we save this here, it should automatically rerun, and now we see 2 failed tests. And now we can simply inspect our log here, and it might be a bit hard to read, but basically here we see expected AppWorks to equal AppWorks, so this is a problem when failed. And the same is true down there, because both times we're missing the test that we don't have AppWorks here in the template where we expected it to contain AppWorks with 2 P's, but now it only has 1. So this is how we can then interpret these test results and find out what's going wrong. And now I'm going to fix this again to save it and rerun the tests automatically. Just takes a couple of seconds. And now we see they're all successful again. So this is how we run the tests, keep this running, and how we then see failing as well as successful tests. Now with that running, I can add some new things to this application to, well, enhance a little bit and dive deeper into testing.